In some ways, I think this might be the most extraordinary conversation of the afternoon. We have here a group of 5 young professional Catholics, every one of them devout, every one of them from a very different background, trying to live exactly the kind of life that St. Monica wants to help them lead, a life of joyful witness from very different circumstances. So the idea here is that Mr. Brennan Stephen, who is known to many of you from his hugely valued collaboration with Catholic Conscience over several years, is going to lead a conversation that includes himself in exactly these things. I'm going to take frantic notes. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Matt, for having us and welcoming us. Hello, everyone. It's very nice to see you. My name is Brennan Stephen. As Matt said, I used to be involved with Catholic Conscience and involved in different parts of the Archdiocese, and we have an amazing panel here. I'll do very, very brief introductions from right to left. So Peter Copeland works for the Ontario government. He's a public policy advisor with Ontario Solicitor General. Dr. Samantha Rossi is a family doctor as of a couple of months ago now, very recently. Congratulations, Dr. Rossi. There you Robin D'Souza is in academia, and I realize, Robin, I don't know where you're at.
I'm at St. Michael's College.
St. Michael's College. Robin's at St. Michael's College. And Maria is a lawyer. She works specifically in Indigenous law. So thank you all for joining us and for being here. So we're the youth panel, air quotes. And I think it's good to introduce this conversation by sort of briefly saying, this was referenced in an earlier presentation, but we have something very interesting on stage right now. A 2022 Angus Reid study found that less than 2 out of 10 Canadians below the age of 35 are religiously committed. And so here we have them, folks, the statistics, the quote-unquote 2 out of 10. So we're going to have a very wide-ranging conversation, I think, about our faith, about our particular vocational circumstances, the joys of those vocations as Catholics, the immense challenges of those vocations in both the professional setting and in our culture, and a little bit of a look forward as to what makes us hopeful and some of our dreams for what's possible when we, bring our faith into our professional life. But again, I think in the context of, this is sadly a rare thing these days, I think it's worth starting if you could all very briefly share a little bit about what brought you to Christ, whether that was wonderful parenting and you've been part of our church the whole life, or you came very recently. Let's maybe start with that. So Maria, why don't we start with you?
Sat on this side and had to be the first to answer the question. Very briefly, I was a cradle Catholic, born into a Catholic family. Not really, my formation was, it was, I think, what we all kind of get, go to church on Sunday, and, my mother was always very devout, and so her example definitely shone through. My father is not Catholic, but someone who has very solid human virtue, so seeing both of those things kind of coming together through both of their characters and personality served in and of itself as a really great formation for me. And then I've sort of, as I grew up, and it's still a work in progress, continuing to learn how to integrate that into my life every day.
Right.
Hi, I'm Robin. I was raised also in a Catholic family, a homeschool Catholic family in Saskatchewan, and in particular by a mom who believed in sort of the old forms of teaching the faith. So I was well catechized and well formed intellectually, I think by a young age, and was very moved as well by my mom's prayer life and her example. Later, when I was 16, I encountered Christ in a more personal way at a Catholic youth retreat. I remember that at the time I had been introduced to St. Thomas Aquinas and his explanation for transubstantiation, including the terms substance and accidents. And I can remember, I was just a very intellectual kind of Catholic, and I remember being at the youth retreat and seeing Jesus present in the Eucharist up on the altar and having a sort of head-to-heart moment where anything that I knew about Jesus came down into my heart. And I was so excited by the fact that I could know him more personally. And then since then, I have been involved in many Catholic organizations over the years, including taking a year at a Catholic Bible school, and also I was involved with Catholic Christian outreach during my undergrad, and so I've had a lot of opportunities, I guess, for Catholic community over the years that have really helped me grow in my faith.
Hi everyone, I'm Samantha. So I am also a cradle Catholic, but I would say more of a culturally Catholic Italian family. So we'd go to Mass occasionally, but not all the time, that was for sure. My coming of faith was very gradual. I'd say I always had a closeness with God since I was a child. My mom taught me to pray before going to bed, and I think that stuck with me. But over time, I encountered illness as a child, and that, kind of taught me to stop relying on myself and to look elsewhere. And it was really during my high school years, I got involved with an organization called the Missionaries of the Poor. They do a lot of music as part of their ministry, and I'm also a singer and a musician outside of other things that I do. So that was really the gateway for me, was just participating in the music and then encountering people that were so joyful and authentically living out their faith. That really attracted me to it. And then when I went on to undergraduate studies at McMaster University, they had a really, really thriving ministry going on there, and I got really involved in the McMaster Catholic Students Association, and that's what really kind of solidified my faith, and since then just been trying to stay as involved as possible and just deepen my faith.
This is great. I'm the only convert, and I didn't convert from another form of Christianity. I went 0 to 100. I guess you could say. So my name is Peter. My path to the faith, I think, when I look back, maybe there were seeds of it just in my family life, very, very close family. Grandmother on one side, practicing Anglican, but very, kind of quiet about it. I went to school for business and kind of like a, big jock type. Always seeking success and that sort of thing. And I guess I just picked up, literature and philosophy for the first time near the end of undergrad, and it, just kind of seen emptiness and waywardness in my colleagues and what I was studying, and took the intellectual path and tried to uncover every stone. I studying philosophy, and but it was really only when I let Christ into my heart to heal some wounds that it became real. I'd had exposure to various thinkers over my studies, and it wasn't until I guess I met my now wife, who is her family is Catholic, kind of. Also, not necessarily fully embodying it, but just some things that were very different from my own upbringing. Very communitarian, an appreciation for what I think comes from Catholic sacramentality, just of, the meaning and purpose in all things. Stuff is not just, inordinate matter. It has an intelligibility and a purpose to it. So here I am now, just a few years in, really, but I think it was a long time coming. So,
thank you all. We're now going to kind of talk to each individual panelist and go a little bit deeper into their particular sector and the challenges there. And I think just to introduce that part of the conversation, it's worth dwelling for a moment on our circumstances, cultural realities that we kind of find ourselves in. And if I could hypersimplify those realities, we might say on the positive side, we live in a time where technology has made so much more possible. New forms of community, new forms of relating with one another. Life is longer, life can be better. There's never been so much emphasis on the voice of those on the peripheries of life and bringing those to the center of public dialogue. But on the flip side, enormous challenges to living out the fullness of our faith in the public context, just challenges to the reality that our faith is one to be lived in a public context. And a very aggressive secularization of, obviously none of this is terribly shocking to people in this room. That means we're really seeing rapid changes in the moral outlook of different parts of society. And so with those in mind, I think I'd like to start with Samantha, because Samantha is in healthcare, and I think these trends are probably felt most intensely in that particular area of life. Samantha, you're very aware of this. John Paul II called it a culture of death. In Laudato Si, Pope Francis called it throwaway culture. It's the idea that human life is not universally human life from conception to natural death. It's some people are human and some people are not. And I think most especially in the rapidity with which we've seen the onset of legalized euthanasia and its growing popularity in Canada has been shocking to even those of us who kind of knew this was the cultural context. So I think with that kind of big, heavy reality in mind, could you tell us a little bit about how you're feeling those trends and your view of them as you enter into the healthcare world as a new doctor?
Yeah, I think you've characterized it very well. There's been a lot of, as you say, the culture of death. There's been a real shift towards that. The way that I kind of frame it in a way is that there's a shift towards ableism and to ageism, and we see that really demonstrated in the way that beginning of life issues are being addressed, as well as end of life issues, and of course everything else in between, but those are where we're seeing it very apparently. Just to share from some of my own personal experiences, to give you an idea of how early in the pipeline it starts. This was before even getting accepted to medical school when I was applying, and I told Matthew about this, but at the time, the Trudeau government was funding specifically, like sterilization and contraceptives abroad in other countries. And we were asked to write an essay for one of the schools saying, why we support the women's health initiatives that are taking place abroad, and weren't given much, way to deviate from that. And, I found a very creative way around it and talked a little bit about, the Gardasil vaccine or something else, but tried to kind of stray away from what they were getting at. But it's unfortunate that from as early on as just getting accepted to medical school, they're trying to screen out people with certain sorts of beliefs. And then kind of going on from that, it's been a trend throughout my medical training. So I am a family medicine resident. I've decided to go into family medicine as a career. And during one of my core rotations as a medical student, I did a rural rotation figuring that, maybe it'd be more comprehensive and that I'd get a really good experience and see what it all looked like. And then I ended up actually getting paired with a set of preceptors that my friend referred to as the unholy trinity in terms of what they were performing. So one of the preceptors did MAID or euthanasia provisions once a week, kind of scheduled in her practice. Another one was doing transgender care throughout the practice, and the other one was providing medical abortions, meaning abortions that you take medicine for if it's early enough in the gestation. So I was shocked by this. I was like, wow, I don't understand that this is the trends of medicine right now, and I thought going to this rural rotation I wouldn't encounter such things, but we're seeing this more and more, and it's terribly concerning. And I think, at the moment, it's something we'll talk about later. I think it's, for us as Catholics, it's definitely going to take a certain level of creativity and also just being really bold about your beliefs, of course, communicating it in a way that's very gentle. But also really just being able to stick with what you believe in and to try and find creative ways to navigate through the system. And then once in practice, once I'm kind of out of the training phase totally, being able to practice authentically and to stand by that. Because as it is right now, there's a lot of trends toward kind of just disposability of life, whether that's abortion or euthanasia and kind of everything else in between.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's fair to say within a profession, you're often privy to things and see things kind of not in the good way, at the cutting edge, and then, the rest of us read about it in the newspapers 5 years later and are shocked to discover certain things are happening. And so, on the one hand, that's frustrating reality, but on the other, that is something that makes the faithful witness in a profession so important, is being right there on the front lines when something is happening. And so, with that in mind, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on, big question, and you don't have a crystal ball, but where are things going? Where do you see things developing from your viewpoint?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think probably people are very aware right now that healthcare is kind of on the brink of it's not doing very well at the moment. It's kind of on the brink of collapsing in a lot of ways. And I think perhaps that could be a way for things to change, like an opportunity for people to, with good values, to kind of enter in and to start to change the culture and change the way that things are happening. And I'm really, the optimistic and hopeful side of me, the Catholic side of me 100% would be really hoping for that we could kind of take hold within the culture and change things. The way that things are currently going, as I've kind of highlighted, I think the values that we're being instructed in medical school and in residency are just not very in line with our own beliefs as Catholics, and there's certainly a lot of challenges in our training to try and practice differently. But I am hopeful. I think with the way that healthcare is going, there's a lot of burnout. There's a lot of nurses and all sorts of other professionals in healthcare that are leaving the field because it's just been such a difficult environment. I think that this might provide an opportunity or an opening for us to kind of change the way things are going.
Thank you, Samantha. I'm going to turn to Robin now because I think we're seeing this most vividly in the healthcare space, but a lot of these ideas I think that have led to these realities. So for example, our contemporary anthropological confusion about what is a human being, what is the nature of human life, what makes human life valuable, a lot of that really stems from academia. And so I think it's worth talking a little bit, Robin, about what you're seeing as someone on the academic side. You're in a very secular environment. You're in a Catholic university, but part of a larger secular university system. Mm-hmm. So from your perspective, what challenges are you seeing from a Catholic perspective in that environment?
Right. My undergrad was at University of Saskatchewan, and I had the blessing of there being a Catholic college there, St. Thomas More, so I did have, some Catholic education at that point, but was in the wider context of a secular institution, and then did a master's at University of Ottawa, and just completed my PhD in English literature at the University of Toronto this past year, actually. I defended in March, and so it was at a secular institution, so I know a secular department. So now I feel just really blessed to be at St. Mike's because it's a little bit more of a free place to practice my faith and to relax a little bit more. But I agree with the statement about forgetting what it is to be a human. To be a human is to be material and spiritual all at once, and I feel like in secular academia in general, there's a wish to reduce humans to just the material. In so doing, I'm seeing that there's this deep religious impulse within human beings that's not being oriented in the right direction. So there's a lot of ideological possession as a result, because there's like a void, right, that's left there, and then where do you put that? where is it going to go? So there's an oversimplification of ethics, which I think has been talked about already a lot today, about the reduction of ethics to power dynamics, for example. At the same time, there seems to be this moving target as far as what the prioritization of an ethical good is. So it kind of keeps moving, and you're not quite sure. You're all kind of like, everyone's kind of doing this like shuffle step to keep up with where the new ethical good is that I should be promoting, kind of thing. But I think it's all related. All of these things that are happening within secular academia, and I'm more into the humanities part of that, is related to a deep need within humans to orient themselves towards a spiritual good, towards belief in something, but they're unaware of how being your own guide in that can be dangerous.
You use the term ideological there, and so I want to zoom in on that for a moment. I did a political science degree, and I remember vividly almost every single class I did, one of the first things we would do is, here's a topic. What does liberalism have to say about this? What does feminism have to say about this? What does you were just absolutely bombarded with ideological perspectives, and I found that often they formed almost like tribal groupings in an academic context, where there was just these parties of ideologies that were in competition with each other. I'd be curious to hear, you touched on this a little bit, but what do you see as the role of ideologies in the academic context right now? And where is that going? Where is that taking us?
I think I mean, in my mind, I think ideologies are usually overly simplified systems of thinking or structures of thinking. And I think what they're doing right now within secular academia is shutting down conversation. That's what's happening. So, and I wouldn't even know where to start with examples with what I saw happening in English literature. I think it's probably, in English, is probably one of the most compromised disciplines when it comes to that oversimplification, I guess, of ethics and in the discussion of literature. And there's a lot of policing of thought and research. There's a general antagonism towards, any past view that doesn't hold to the specific view or ideology that we must currently hold. And I was at the University of Toronto during the whole Jordan Peterson saga, so during my PhD that happened, and regardless of what you think of his ideas or how he's done things, like as an academic, it was really frightening to see another academic who was experienced and well-published and tenured and all of those things being, basically chased out of the institution, and unable to speak about how his own research might apply to public conversation, right? So it was difficult to be there then. Throughout my PhD, for example, I've received many, almost daily emails from the Department of English that are full of the ethical cues, that we're to follow in the structures of the emails, in the events that are being planned. I was there when they decided to rewrite the entire PhD exam, like the comprehensive exam, and removed several classic texts from the list in order to make room for texts that are deemed marginal, I guess. And I can see some good in those kinds of efforts, but there's also a sense of that progressivism that we were talking about earlier, where we try to leave the past behind and we're just moving into some kind of future that we're going to create, I guess, for ourselves. Yes, and it affected how I wrote my dissertation. I felt that I was lucky to have a Catholic supervisor, so that was great, and he gave me a lot of good advice throughout my whole PhD and gave me a lot of freedom as well. But I didn't just have him as my audience. I had committee members, and and then there's internal examiners and external examiners, and you have to keep all of these audiences in mind as you write, right? And I was often getting my writing back with, this is really unclear. This is all really unclear. You need to clarify things. And I would realize in those moments that I was writing out of fear, right? Because my lack of clarity in my writing was coming from a place of fear. So I would often have to recenter myself in my Catholic life in those moments and go, who am I again? Who am I in Christ? Who am I? And then I could clarify my language. So I was as long as I could find myself again, then I could write again. And then I would get better feedback too from the committee. Actually, they would be like, "Okay, you're clearer now. We understand what you're arguing." But I have had throughout my teaching part of things, kind of an oppressive sense of watching about what I have to say in the classroom, or maybe how I'm saying it, so that I don't offend people. And I think the most disturbing experience I had, though, with people who are possessed by ideology would be the fact that I've had a couple peers in my program unfriend me because of, I guess, adhering to beliefs that are not allowed anymore. And I even had, and that kind of led to a feeling of, oh, maybe I'll be found out by the department and then I won't be able to finish, which just sounds so paranoid when I say it out loud, but it was that's literally how it did feel, right? That I'm not, as someone who is approaching literature from a more traditional perspective, I could be rooted out. That's how it felt. So, yes. There are lots of good academics out there. There are lots and lots of them. But I do think a lot of them are scared too and are quieter and, Yeah. So they are being overrun by the more noisy ones. So, yeah, I have more thoughts about where we can go from here, but we can get to that later. Yeah.
Thank you, Robin. Carrying cross as well as a theme, I'm sure you're all noticing here. So I want to turn to Maria, because Maria, you're in a very interesting position. You're a lawyer, but your vocation is really centered on playing a role in the ongoing process of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples in our country. And you do that as a Catholic. And so I'd like to turn to you and maybe give us a perspective as a Catholic, from inside the movement, air quotes, what it looks like and Catholic participation. And I mean, obviously this is an issue that's sharply in focus right now, and especially for our church. So yeah, I would love to get your thoughts on that.
So I think I could probably summarize my experience to date as complicated. It's been complicated, and particularly given the events of this past year, the complication has been heightened in many respects. So just to situate myself within this context of reconciliation, so that everyone sort of has some kind of background. So I am Black Métis, and I wanted to practice Aboriginal law primarily because of the history that we've seen unfold in this country and the injustices that Indigenous peoples have faced and continue to face, and realizing that the law was very key in inflicting those injustices. And in my mind, now sometimes I question, but in my mind, I thought, okay, if the law was key in doing a lot of these injustices, then it must be key in undoing them as well. So then I decided to become a lawyer and practice in this area in particular. And it's an area of law that is deeply racist. It's an area of law that categorizes people, it's in the title, it categorizes people on the basis of their race. And your race and what category of Indigenous you fall into will determine what kind of rights you are entitled to under the Constitution. So, it's, like I said, it's deeply complex, but I've always had this hope of reconciliation. And as a Métis person, I was always taught that we have a very special responsibility for reconciliation because we are of two nations, right? Our origins as a people, our genesis as a people is of two nations coming together and forming a new one, the Métis Nation. And so we're that bridge between the two. So I went to law school and armed with my law degree, I was like, okay, I'm gonna make this a reality in whatever way I can. And you start to realize very quickly that you have to do it on a piecemeal basis, bit by bit, trying to undo the structures and the systems that have inflicted so much harm on my people and my First Nation cousins. That's what Métis people, that's who we call First Nations, our cousins. So I would say inside the movement of Indigenous rights, I think there's some people who are still hopeful that reconciliation is possible, but there's others who are like, oh, it's dead, like we're over it. The TRC was 2015, like no one's really listening or paying attention. But I think what is a really, I guess to the extent that you can say that there was a benefit that came out of this past year, is that I think there's sort of a renewed interest in it. There's a renewed interest in reconciliation and what this is. And it sort of brought people's attention back to this issue that isn't just an Indigenous issue, it's a human issue. It's a human issue that I've chosen to respond to through the law. But I think we all can respond to it in our own individual circumstances and according to our own capacity. That's where I'm at right now on reconciliation.
So you use the word complicated, so let's go into complicated for a moment. You're Métis, you're Catholic. You're working towards reconciliation in the legal context. I mean, so, I'll kind of ask it bluntly. I mean, what is it like to be a Catholic in that context? Because I'm sure there are mixed feelings about Catholicism, about the church, about the role of the church in our history. So how do you experience that? How do you live that in the context you're in?
Yeah, so for me, I as a Catholic, an Indigenous Catholic in particular, I think we all struggle with tensions regardless of what identity that we carry. But for me in particular, seeing what happened over this past year, it sort of brought this interior struggle to the surface. This tension and this struggle that I've experienced in the past just by virtue of the church's history with Indigenous people, but really reminding myself that my faith isn't about an institution. It's about a relationship with a person that I know, that I've encountered, that I know is real, Christ, in case you guys were wondering. So that really helped to center me and ground me in what has been a very tumultuous year for many reasons. So that's sort of what I've done on an individual level and on an interior level. But what I find is that, so first of all, when I'm in my workspace, so I work at a private law firm, it's a fairly progressive law firm, and it's made a lot of strides in terms of advancement in the law. But that also comes with, I think, some isms, right? Some isms are sort of infiltrated there, and I can see them, and I'm aware of them. But I also know that everyone that I've met so far anyways, that I've worked with, a lot of the other lawyers they all have very, very big hearts and are wanting to do good. But when they discover that, I'm this Indigenous lawyer who also is Catholic, I think a lot of people sort of kind of are like, they can't reconcile it in their head. Like, they're like, conceptually, they're like, what? But what about everything that's happened? And what about, and that doesn't just happen in my work sphere. That's happened in some of my relationships with my peers in law school, like even before this past year happened. I had a CBC, for example, reporter who I spoke to just in advance of the papal visit, who was sort of trying to get an understanding of, I guess the Indigenous perspective, or a Indigenous perspective on the papal visit. And when I had told her that, I'm an Indigenous and Catholic and practicing, she was like, well, isn't that a contradiction? I was like, no, it's not a contradiction. I'm like, are you human? Like, again, no matter what identity you carry, it's reconciling that identity with your faith, and it's completely reconcilable. It's called integration. It's living your faith in an integrated way. And the church's teaching on enculturation has been immensely helpful for me in living out my faith. So yeah, I sort of get like eyebrow raises when people do discover that I'm Catholic. But I think once they get to know me and once we build that relationship, it begins to make sense. I can share this, I think, with you just because it happened quite recently. This past week, I was organizing a lunch with my mentor because as a junior lawyer, they assign you a senior lawyer in the firm. And he said, oh, what are you doing this weekend? I said, oh, I have a speaking engagement. He's like, oh, about what? And I was like, okay, well, full disclosure. And so I just said, I was brought up in the Catholic tradition, and I'm speaking on a panel about faith in the public square, essentially. And he was like, oh, now he's sort of discovered this other part of me that wasn't apparent on its face. Another thing that I do to keep to live my faith in a very active way is even on my desk in my office, I have a statue of Our Lady, very small statue of Our Lady, and also a tobacco tie, because within Indigenous culture, we have 4 sacred medicines, tobacco being one of them. And so sort of the purpose of it is you attach your prayer intentions to it, and I set it next to Our Lady. And that's a way of living my faith in an integrated way, both my faith and my culture.
Thank you. Down the line. You talked about culture, you talked about the isms, and I think that's actually a good introduction to your part now, Peter. So, I mean, Peter, you are obviously someone who writes a lot and is very interested in the role of philosophy and the morality that kind of underpins the wider culture. You've worked in government, you've worked in public policy on the political side, so you've seen how that applies in that larger public policy scale. And a lot of the challenges I think we've talked about are really centered in cultural challenges. You know, it trickles up, for lack of a better term. And so I'd like to ask you, you know, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges from your perspective that prevent those in public life, in cultural life, from really clearly seeing and understanding the nature of human dignity, the common good, and these very good and true things?
Yeah, so I'm gonna I think characterize the way we think of politics and then the personal to draw out what I think are some really heartening things in some of the isms, I guess you would say, and also, you know, a big contradiction. And I think we think of the political sphere today with great optimism. You know, not hope, but great optimism. It's you know, we are going to dismantle systems. We are going to liberate ourselves. You know, the past is a litany of mistakes. And, you know, maybe that's on the progressive side, and on the, you know, more conservative side, it's, you know, efficiency. We are experts, and we are going to control everything and optimize, and everything is you know, a problem that can be solved, including people. You know, there are problems to be solved. There are things, basically. And then, you know, great optimism in this. And then in the personal sphere, it's like, oh, you know, whatever, you know, kind of, oh, don't try too hard, you know, whatever you do is fine, and, you know, don't affirm everything everyone does or says, and you know, there's something really good in both of these things, I guess you could say, but it's this really odd, you know, kind of contrast, I guess you could say, because on the one hand, great optimism about the political, and then great pessimism about the personal, and so it's kind of funny, and I think two big things that the church needs to come to terms with, and also distance itself from in an appropriate way, are two isms, I guess, that are front and center for us: liberalism and democracy. They're great goods, great leaps ahead that affirm the dignity of the person, you know, as an individual who can choose, who has that infinite value, and democracy, you know, ennobles and enables that participation. But they're viewed as ends in themselves today. I think we see that everywhere, right? It's like, you've chosen it and it's great, or, you know, the majority has decided this is, you know, marching on, this is correct. And so we need to affirm the great aspects within both of those things, but precisely as means and not as ends. And I think, you know, the way we can do that is this kind of disarming move. I've seen people do it. I don't do it so well myself, maybe, but when you use that liberal freedom, you know, we've been given, to choose something other than it, it is incredibly disarming, you know, to choose something higher than that, to choose affections to people, to choose you know, deep friendship in community, to affirm the dignity of everyone by you know, protecting the vulnerable and the weak, and just calling people to higher things. And I think in my sphere in politics, you know, and I came to the faith through the intellectual side of things. I like arguments, you know, and I like criticism and all that, and I like to tell people, you know, oh, you should think of things this way. But I've really learned that friendship and accompaniment is all important, because people are just dying for that. They are dying for, they're so lonely, and, you know, they've been, you know, kind of fed this very confused mix of things. Again, great optimism, and then, you know, whatever, man, about your own life. And they're just, you know, they want something deeper. And so I think, you know, I've learned through, you know, Catholic Conscience and St. Monica and so many organizations that are here tonight in various ways that, yeah, friendship and deeper community, these are the things that the people yearn for, and that are most needed today. And I think that's the way, one of the ways of engaging in politics, in the political sphere.
I mean, you're speaking to something I think that resonates very deeply, which is this intense, and Mother Teresa talked about this in the West, this poverty of spirit that we're really seeing, this lack of meaning people have, this kind of zombie-like existential dread many people feel going through life, not sure what the purpose of it all is. And so, I mean, the message of life in Christ and the meaning of life is so much more, has so much more potential now. And yet there's this kind of funny contrast, which is, I'll put this really bluntly, we're kind of weird. Like we're, you know, it's Maria with her mentor saying, you know, I'm Catholic. Oh, right? Like, you know, like the moment of like, it's like coming out and you're like, oh, I'm Catholic, what? Like, so we're in this funny time where even articulating it publicly can be uncomfortable and in some places unwelcome. And, you know, we can see that in politics and we can see that in our personal lives. So I'd love to get your thoughts, Peter, like what is going on with that? Like, you know, just when we need it most, I'm being a little melodramatic, just when we need it most, it's harder to talk about, it's harder to say it, it's more difficult.
Yeah, and I think sincerity and witness are so key here. It's that integrated sense of living the faith, both understanding it and practicing it. Again, it's something so few of us do well. We can do one or the other, but that witness is all important, because I think, you know, modernity and post-modernity, they have stripped away many of these, you know, maybe they're kind of naive assumptions about people. You know, people are not heroes. We're all just people, and we need to show that humanity, show that vulnerability, in a way that yet is heroic in its sincerity, in its simplicity. And I'll return to my previous answer in a way. Friendships, I find, you know, it's both a virtue and a vice. Everyone has their own vocation and calling, so I think you have to find out what it is for you. But, you know, I'm a very intense person. You know, I don't like talking about the weather or sports, whatever. I go straight to the core, whatever I'm with people. And of course, you know, that could be really bad. Like, okay, man, you know, lighten up a little bit. But at the same time, it's one of those things where so many people have not been asked about, you know, what really makes them tick. You know, what's the purpose of their life, and just doing this in that way is, you know, it's disarming, and it's I think, you know, fresh and light, and people haven't experienced that. So I know that's some of the things that got me into the faith. So that's what I'd say.
So you've brought us into the realm of evangelization now. And so I think in this last part of the conversation, we've talked about some of the challenges. I'd like to talk now about how do we evangelize in this time and place, in all its beauty and joy and strangeness and vices and all of that. I think it's fair to say, and I'm certainly not the first to observe this, that, you know, the old way of making Catholics is broken. We used to have a bit of a cultural wheel, you know. Your parents would go to church, You'd go to your parish, get baptized there, you'd get confirmed there. Maybe you'd meet someone in the parish or at your Catholic school. You'd get married, you'd take your kids, on and on the beautiful wheel went. And that's not really, I think it's fair to say, that's not really the case anymore. And I think you're hearing it in the stories of the folks on this panel. To be a young Catholic today is to choose it. I think that's really critical, to choose it. And to choose it despite all the challenges that exist around it. Which means essentially, we're in a time for saints. That's maybe a much simpler way of saying that. Thank you. So with that in mind, I'd like to ask each of you in turn, what do you see as the greatest opportunities from your perspective to evangelize in this cultural moment? And maybe more particularly in your professional fields or in the sphere of life that you occupy. And Peter, you're holding the mic, so maybe we'll start with you this time.
Okay, sure. So I've kind of talked about this in the personal sphere. So in the level of politics, I think of the Catholic third way, Catholic social teaching. That's what Catholic conscience tries to bring to the fore, really as an antidote to the ideologies, because it's the great both and. It's the best of all, you could say. And I think broadly speaking that means great care and concern for the vulnerable, ensuring that people have access to the means of life that ensure their dignity, and then great standards, great recognition of the importance of the natural family, the natural law. And so broadly speaking, I think of Catholic social teaching in the Catholic way throughout the centuries as more economically left, I guess, in today's terms, and socially conservative, and a way in which this is embodied and can be embodied today, where we have declining birth rates. We've got an increasingly high cost of living, I guess I would say, and the cost maybe comes from, I like to think of it this way. There are so many services, regulations, rights that come attendant with every person in an advanced Western democracy that the cost per person is it's so astronomically high. And so how do we balance the various poles of social and political life? The principles of subsidiarity and solidarity, I think, really do that. They balance that well. And one of the ways in the political sphere today, I think it can become manifest, is in mixed model delivery of things like public goods, for example. So we had a great talk this morning about charter schools and education. Again, all about this mixed model. You can apply it to healthcare, education, social services. You're preserving and even improving the importance of the equal access to these services that enable human dignity and flourishing, and then you're opening it up to choice, to market mechanisms in various ways, which only really, I think, improve the way in which services are delivered and alleviate some of the deep scleroses our state bureaucracies are facing now, and so that's something I think hopefully more people start thinking and writing about and exploring ways of bringing that out, that balance of subsidiarity and solidarity.
Yeah, evangelization is more important than ever right now, as you've mentioned. Kind of the way of bringing up Catholics in the past seems to be broken, and there needs to be a new solution to it. I have a couple of thoughts on it, and I guess maybe just even my own stage in life, but I think that young adulthood is a really rich time. It's a time where a lot of people are asking questions, they're searching for their purpose, they're looking for greater things. Maybe it's their first time moving away from home, or their first time starting to think for themselves. I think that's a really important time to capitalize on There's a lot of really good university level ministries that exist, and supporting those is very important. And I think the Archdiocese has also done a really good job in the recent years of starting a young adult ministry that's been expanding as well. So it's in the East End, the West End. They've just started one in the North or the York region as well. I think that young adulthood is a really important time that we must capitalize on, because we're just so impressionable at that age, and there's a lot of forces kind of working against young adults. A parish priest of mine a couple of years ago, I remember, described, sending kids away to university for the first time as like walking into a massive fire in a building with a garden hose and not really having any tools to deal with all of the different things that are happening. And so I think it's so important that there's a focus on outreach to students and really trying to get them to ask the important questions, and also just communicating with love and using kind of, like a Socratic approach, asking questions, drawing answers out of people as opposed to just telling them what to think. Because they're searching and they're thirsting, and they're looking for love in all the wrong places a lot of the time, but being able to provide them a message of hope and to get them to ask the right questions, and dialogue is really, really important. Thinking a little bit more, I guess, about my sphere in healthcare and in medicine, I know one thing that drew me to healthcare to begin with, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I was all over the map. I did an undergrad program. It was probably the closest thing you'll find in Canada to like a classic liberal arts education, taking courses in like logic and writing and physics and everything in between. Had no idea what I wanted, but it was really in encountering through volunteering with a missionary group, encountering vulnerable people that were, very poor, homeless, deformed and physically in one way or another, and abandoned. That was my experience of just meeting Christ through those people and really being drawn to serve. And I think that's a really valuable way for people to be evangelized, is to kind of see the need that there is in the world. And again, it doesn't need to be abroad. There's so much need in our communities. But to see the need that's there, to encounter it, see Christ through that, and then to be kind of invited forward from that. So, it's a few ideas on that.
So, evangelization in the humanities, and I guess in particular in English studies, which is what I'm familiar with. I was really attracted to English literature because it seemed to kind of bridge discipline. It was had its roots in everything, theology, philosophy. You could talk about literature and history, literature and philosophy, and I liked that it was a bridging kind of discipline. And I think that mentality is what I'd like to bring into how I think about evangelization. Like, how do we bridge, right, the conversation between how the kids, I guess, coming into school, into university these days, and coming to know Jesus. And I think that, I just remember that when I read the Gospel of John, the first chapter of John, in the beginning was the Word, right? And the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and then the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. As someone who was really into literature, I had a light turn on, right? I was like, oh, this is why I love language, and this is why I love literature. It's because language is one of the markers of what it is to be divine, or to be human, to be spiritual, to have a soul. And I think that attitude, trying to awaken students, I guess, to that idea that why is it that we express, as conscious human beings, why is it that we communicate in certain ways? Why do we create art with language? Why is this a thing? Why does this happen? Even that is a starting point already to get a conversation going towards larger truths of, as we were talking about before, beauty, truth, goodness, as being the ultimate source, right, of everything, including the study of literature. I think another thing I've done in my field is I've found communities. I tried to find authors in particular that were bridging the conversation. So in my research, I found I've been into a Catholic Welsh-British poet named David Jones. He's the subject of my research right now. And he is a modernist poet and a modernist painter. He's well known in aesthetic modernist circles. And so he bridges the conversation again, right? We have another bridger. So it's nice to find figures, I think, within research that can create conversation in academic communities among people who are doing research of all kinds, from all kinds of backgrounds. So those are the places where evangelization happen and where good conversation and bridging conversations happen.
Yeah, so in reflecting on evangelization and how I think we can work to fix a wheel that's been broken, I think is how you phrased it. I think drawing on my own cultural context, for Indigenous peoples, we and further to Peter's point earlier, we tend to be very intense. We live very intensely, and we see the world like very much through a relational paradigm. Everything's about relationships. And I think evangelization is best done that way, through personal relationships. Trying to do it in any other way is, for me, it's a little incomprehensible, because even for me, my conversion, even though I was born into a Catholic family, my conversion on an interior level only happened through meeting other devout Catholics who live their faith in an integrated way, not in a way that's prescriptive, but that's integrated. So that's something that I try to emulate in return, understanding that Christianity it's not a religion that's about you. It's not a faith that's about you. It's about other people. And so always sort of living with a disposition and orientation towards the other, and being very authentic and transparent and integral in those conversations.
I'm at a minute 30 left, so I'm going to test the upper limits with apologies to Matthew. Very quickly, and maybe in a couple of sentences for each of you, I want to close by just having you each reflect. Pope Francis wrote a beautiful book during the pandemic called Let Us Dream. And really the theme of that book was, these times of enormous trial. And he was referring to the pandemic, but I think in each of your fields you've brought up elements of crisis and of trial. That there is a time of trial is always a time of distinguishing the paths of the good that lead to the future from other paths that lead nowhere or backwards, and with clarity we can better choose the first. So I think I want to close by sort of dwelling in the Pope's blessed words and just dream for a minute, maybe in a couple of sentences, big ask. What is your dream as a Catholic for your field? And what is the vision? Like where's the good place that we can go with the right values, with the right path? Paint a picture for us of what we're aiming for in each of your areas, and we'll start with you, Maria.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, pressure. I would say that for me, what I would like to see is, I think, just an awareness that the Catholic Church isn't anti-Indigenous rights, because I think there's a perception out there that it is. And it's not. It's so far from. So an understanding that Catholic social doctrine very much supports this effort and this movement. Looking throughout history, before pre-1982, before the enshrinement of Section 35 of the Constitution, which is that section that recognizes and affirms Aboriginal treaty rights. There were Northern bishops at the time, before the repatriation of the Constitution, who advocated for Indigenous rights to be recognized in our highest law. So having that awareness, I think, more permeated in my profession would certainly make it easier for me to do my job as a Catholic Indigenous woman.
If I were to dream for the field of English studies, it would be that I think just that we can open up conversations again, and that we'll get back to a place where we're not afraid of ideas, even ideas that seem scary. That would be wonderful. And I think that as Catholic academics, what my dream is for them is to be able to speak freely as well, and to foster that kind of culture, and to show maybe people from a secular background that there they're not afraid of ideas either, right? Like I'm okay, I can listen to your ideas and your arguments, and I can research them, and we can argue about them, we can discuss them, and I'm not afraid of them. I think that would be my dream for a new academia.
I think my dream for medicine would have it be practiced in a way that sees the flourishing of the whole human person, and not just practitioner, provider of services, essentially. So kind of practitioners that are, again, fully integrated, to use Maria's term, and that are really practicing in a way that is life-giving. To have physicians that actually value, every single human life and have love and respect for every single human being. And I think what would flow from that is a change in a lot of our policies and our laws. And so, yeah, just really transformation of the heart to really love life and to respect it from the very beginning to the natural end as well.
So I've spoken about subsidiarity and solidarity through mixed model delivery, but I think we would all recognize the toxicity and polarization in today's political climate. And so we want to be rid ourselves of that. And I think a way to do it, because it is a sphere where we have to exchange views and argue. It's not about niceness in this kind of affirmation, but it's loving as willing the good of the other, which entails that deep respect for the other person. And I think the way in which we can do that is something that Bishop Barron does very well, I find. I don't know if you've noticed, but every time he's entering into a dialogue with someone or addressing a topic, it will start by acknowledging the noble motivations, the semina verbi, the seeds of the truth in whatever position or person is talking to, and that is just it's so attractive. It grounds us in respect and love, and then we can disagree well together in a way that unites rather than divides.
Thank you. I think I wanted to end on this note because I think even amidst these challenges, it's worth dwelling for a moment that for thousands of years, Christian dreams, which were often seen as a little crazy, became Christian realities. And 12 people walked out of an upper room and helped to build a church with the grace of God that now has 1.2 billion people in it. And so even amidst all these challenges, I think it's important to dwell on the dreams because we can make these dreams a reality, and hopefully with the help of St. Monica Institute. So thank you to the panelists for giving us their perspectives. Thank you to you all for listening, and have a great rest of the day.